Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. On this episode, I am delighted to welcome Rebecca Cooper. Rebecca Cooper is a middle school religion teacher at an Episcopal school just outside of Washington, D.C. We have been connected online for a long time, and it is a delight to finally do an episode together that focuses on talking about her work at the middle school level. I have had numerous educators on the show over the years to talk about teaching at the high school and college level, but middle school remained a gap in the content of this show, and I am so delighted Rebecca Cooper is here to discuss the fantastic work she does at that grade level. We discuss her path in teaching, the organizational structure of her class, and some of her favorite assessment strategies for 6th and 7th graders. As always, thank you so much for listening to Classical Ideas. Please enjoy my conversation with Rebecca Cooper. Rebecca Cooper, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
I am so delighted that you're here. We have to talk about the fact that years ago, whenever I started this podcast, you came to my attention really early on social media when I was making the podcast, because I tried to start connecting with other teachers. And we dabbled with the idea of doing an episode back in like 2018, 2019, and then it just kind of never really materialized. Probably my fault. Who knows?
That's all right. That's all right.
But it's just so funny that we've managed to come back around now all these years later. What do you remember about that time period?
Yeah, so I think, when I think back to when we initially connected, there was a lot of work being done, new scholarship about the teaching of religion in, K to 12 schools. And so there just seemed to be this flourishing of material. And I've been teaching in this field for a long time. And so I was just really excited, still am, and continuing to reach out to people whose work I admired. And so, of course, I was really digging your podcast and still do, and was finding just it's such a wonderful platform and way for me to continue my learning.
That's exactly what it is for me as well. It's a platform to continue my own learning. And the fact that I'm still finding areas of interest to keep this thing going, like 6, 7 years in,
yeah,
it's completely insane to me. And so I'm grateful that, the podcast has actually survived this long so that we could actually have this conversation. So what I want to know now is if you could kind of tell listeners a little bit about yourself, and maybe like your pathway into teaching in general before we get more specific about religion.
Gotcha. So I'll just kind of start with what I'm currently doing. And so I am the religion department chair and middle school religion and history teacher at St. Stephen's and St. Agnes School. And we're in Alexandria, Virginia, so right outside Washington, D.C. And we are affiliated with the Episcopal Church, so we're a private school. But our student body is pretty large, about 1,100 across 3 campuses. And so my home and has been and always will be the middle school, which I can talk a lot more about later. And I think just for listeners to know, our school, a lot of people assume we're Catholic because we have the name of 2 saints in our name. And even, in terms of diversity in Christianity, people aren't really necessarily familiar with the Episcopal Church. We're a pretty small denomination, fairly progressive, which is something brings me comfort as a teacher. And I guess in addition, it might be helpful to know, because we are a private school, that is part of our admissions process. People can identify on their applications if they practice a religion. And so, about 25% of families either answer no religion or choose not to answer. Only about 20% of our families are Episcopalian. Of course, the majority are Christian, about 65% Christian total. But then we have primarily in terms of religious minority groups, Jewish students, Muslim students, Hindu students, and a few Buddhist students. But then a lot of folks who really don't identify with anything in particular, or folks who may have parents from two different traditions and are navigating sort of what that blended life is like. So that's what I'm currently doing. I currently teach our 6th grade religions course, which is a global religions course. And when I started here, this is now my 22nd year here.
At that school?
Yeah, at this school. It's been a really good home. Wasn't my first job, but 22 years here. And when I got here, I was hired to teach a 6th grade course on the book of Genesis, and then a 7th grade course, which quite honestly, what I inherited was kind of a youth groupy kind of thing. I was like, what is this? And one of the things that has kept me here so long is the tremendous freedom I have to create and design. And so I pretty quickly transitioned that 7th grade course to, at that point, what I called world religions, and taught that for a number of years. And then we had a schedule change, as many schools do. And now my global religions course lives in 6th grade.
It's mandatory too, right?
Everybody takes it. And I'm the only teacher. So on the one hand, it's really nice because 6th grade is the entry point for middle school. So I get to meet all the 6th graders, which is great for relationship building. And they're all required to take it. And so I speak to every, at back to school night, I'm speaking to every parent of our 6th grade student body, and building those relationships and explaining the intentionality of why I do what I do is really an important piece of that.
Wonderful. You started in elementary school, right? At the beginning of your career? Tell me about that switch from elementary to middle school.
Well, and first of all, I have to say I'm one of those who came into teaching a circuitous route. It was not something that I knew. I did not know that teaching middle school religion was my jam the way that it is now. I mean, when I got my undergraduate degree at University of Virginia in anthropology and a minor in religious studies. And upon graduation, I was either looking at Peace Corps in Senegal or joining this program called Inner City Teaching Corps in Chicago. And I opted for Chicago. And so I was teaching at a school on the South Side called Academy of St. Benedict the African, and really started my teaching career there with 3rd graders. So that is really where I learned how to teach. And I had taken courses in education at UVA. I was in the School of Education for a while, but really wasn't ready to say, yes, this is what I want to do. So that experience was really formative for me in Chicago. And I loved 3rd grade. I mean, gosh, you get to teach. At that point, we were still teaching cursive handwriting and, times to multiplication tables and, some really important things happen in 3rd grade. And I also had to teach religion, actually, because it's a Catholic school. But almost all the students were Catholic. They were usually from the Baptist tradition. But I just kind of felt at peace with the kids when I was engaged in those conversations with them. And I will say a big piece of my story, I'm the daughter of an Episcopal priest, so I grew up in the church. So I felt really at home in that space. So I knew I wanted to study more. And the question was, did I want to go to, a PhD program? I've loved hearing your journey and how you have, come in and out of that work, right?
Out. Yep.
And I discerned that, I did want to study more, but I ended up getting my master's in theological studies at Virginia Theological Seminary. And so I got my master's degree within the context of a community where most of the people were preparing to be ordained ministers in the church. And I was one of the non-ordination track people. I was there to reap what I could from the professors, who were all wonderful. And so I did a lot of work on Bible and ethics. And I came out of there wanting to say, well, I taught a little bit before, maybe I'll try church work. So I took a year's job. I didn't know it was just going to be a year, but I took a job as a full-time director of Christian education at a parish outside New York City in Scarsdale, New York. And I moved there right before 9/11. It was August 2001. And all I can say is I knew pretty quickly that my vocation was going to be in the classroom and not in the parish. and B, that I really didn't want to live in Scarsdale. So I am, no offense to any Scarsdale, Westchester County people out there. But I hacked it out for a year, and thankfully the job opened up here that, winter and spring. Here is middle school, and I was 6th and 7th grade. And maybe I can talk a little bit more about why I love middle school.
Well, I do want to actually talk about that right now, because on this podcast, I realized that I've only ever spoken to high school and college professors. I've never had a middle school teacher on this podcast, and I've heard so many great professors and teachers talk about why they think religious studies and stuff like that is important for their age group. I've never heard that answer from a middle school teacher. So tell me a little bit about why you think that studying about religion is important for students at the age group that you're teaching, because you're teaching kids that are like 11, 12 years old. Tell me why it's important to start at that age, and why it's, age appropriate to do what you do.
Absolutely. So I think it's been one of the frustrating things for me as a teacher that middle school, as usual, gets kind of ignored because I see it as such a place of possibility. And so to answer your question, I would say that, as an adult person, of course, I run into people who, rightly so, have had incredible wounds from organized religion, right? Or who carry a lot of baggage or misinformation about religion. And part of my reason for wanting to be at the beginning rather than at the end is because I want to help the construction process rather than the deconstruction process, if that makes sense, right?
Total.
And I'm someone that has, I'm someone who had a fairly positive experience in my own life of the power, the impact of religion. And then, of course, in college, understanding the difference between a devotional approach versus an academic approach. And so that idea of taking an academic approach, and really with middle schoolers, what I am all about is building their vocabulary for understanding what religion is, how to identify it, how to spot it, how to describe it, to build that vocabulary so they can understand the world, build that, complex knowledge of the world, and to kind of, to be honest, be that first person who's going to present the material in academically sound ways and give them the tools that they can use moving forward. And so that's really my whole motivation. It's around, and so I don't necessarily focus on vast amounts of history, because I honestly, and we can talk later, I don't have a tremendous amount of time with them. So I want to maximize the time. And so this has developed over, of course, over 20 years of teaching, but that really what I care so much is helping them, again, build that vocabulary to understand religion and to, and their brains are young. Some of them can go into symbolic, more complex thoughts. Some of them are pretty darn concrete, right? But still, to be the person who, for the first time, I'm the person who is helping to guide them to learn about religions that they have never heard about. So, students who attend our lower school will have heard a whole lot of Bible stories, but they will have never heard of most of what they hear in my class. And so it's a privilege. And in terms of developmental, in terms of their development, the fact that they are just funky and funny.
Yeah.
And I can't take myself too seriously, right?
Yeah.
And I have to break down these concepts. I have to be able to articulate in plain language what it is I want them to come away with. And so it's a challenge for me. It's a creative challenge. But there is so much possibility because they're sponges. And so it's a real privilege to be able to sort of plant those seeds. It really is, teachers, we live in hope, don't we? That the seeds we plant are going to be watered down the line. And so that's what drives a lot of why I really love this age group, to really construct and plant those seeds that can be watered down the line by hopefully people who are committed to that academic knowledge and an understanding that knowledge of religion is essential, right? As we hear the phrase, religious literacy is survival, and that people really understand that.
Yeah, I have two things that really spring to mind based on everything that you just said. One, the watering and then seeing what happens down the line. One of
Yep.
my former students that I taught at my last school in Missouri in my world religions class, which is called Classical Ideas, which is where the name of the podcast comes from. One of my
Mm-hmm.
former students is now teaching that class in that school.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So that's
Well done, teacher.
one thing. So shout out to Josh Wiedemeyer. Second, um, as far as being in the construction versus
Mhm.
deconstruction part,
Mhm.
I have told for years on this podcast, but also in my classroom, the story that I have no concrete memory of ever hearing the word Islam before the events of 9/11. So I was
Mhm.
17 years old when that happened, and I had no recollection of ever
Mhm.
learning about that beforehand. I'm sure that it came up in some kind of obscure world history class that I was
Mhm.
taking, where it would talk about geometry and math and the
Mhm.
influence of the Muslim world in
Mhm.
antiquity or something like that. But I had no concrete knowledge when those events happened in front of my very eyes when I was a senior in high school. I had no construction
Mhm.
before I was exposed to something where all I'm seeing on the news for the next like months and months and months is deconstruction of this event,
Mhm.
talking about it in relation to a particular religion that I had no knowledge of before that. So I cannot even begin to tell you how important that I think that construction period is compared to the deconstruction phase. So I'm really glad that you said that. Those are my immediate thoughts.
And I think my construction phase, I really credit my father, who, as I said, was an Episcopal priest, is an Episcopal priest because, and I grew up in Perrysburg, Ohio, which is about an hour from Detroit, just outside Toledo. And when I was growing up there, we had a mosque built, and it's a beautiful, classically designed mosque that is the Islamic Center of Greater Toledo. And this was in the mid 80s. And I just remember my dad, who made friends with the imam in town, said to me, "Do you want to go visit?" And so here I am, like a freshman in high school. And first of all, my dad is modeling this approach, this openness. And again, parents really have an impact in a way that they sometimes I don't think, take to heart as much as they should.
Hmm.
And so we went to visit. It was my first mosque I ever was in. And I tell my students this, like, I remember picking out my headscarf, and I remember going inside this building, and it was so beautiful from the outside. And here it was in the midst of all these cornfields, in Ohio. And again, that seed for me was planted by my dad. It wasn't in school. It was, my own personal, family that planted that seed of curiosity. And that sort of another thing I model, middle school too is a lot about modeling. It's like modeling an attitude of curiosity rather than fear. And as part of the construction process, like telling students, or not telling, but showing, revealing kind of what to watch for or look for, or to begin to understand what's around them when they pass a house of worship, right? Or see someone wearing a head covering of some sort, or a piece of jewelry or a tattoo, that they can learn something about that person's identity in a positive way that would then allow them to connect and build bridges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, well, let's talk about your class, right?
Sure.
I
Mhm.
am super curious about the overview of your course calendar. So, first of all, are you a semester or a year?
We're year long. It's a year-long course.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, give listeners a tour because there are probably teachers listening. Maybe they want to think about their own course calendar. Maybe they are interested in setting up a course like this at their own school someday. Give me a
Mhm.
tour of your course calendar.
Yeah, so I do see my students all year. We are on a 7-day rotating block schedule, which means that I see my students 2 times in those 7 days. which is a 50% class. So their core courses like math, science, English, history, they meet 4 out of the 7 times in those 7 days. So roughly that equates to about 50 65-minute classes over the year. And so I have organized it differently over the years. When I first started teaching, honestly, I was probably doing the big 5, using a lot of Houston Smith, like that was my start, right? And now I have a shape and a sort of scope and sequence that seems to work really well. And it's actually one too that I have developed in partnership with our history team, so that our history class, which is world history, and basically following, from China, moving towards, the Middle East, and into Europe. I teach the religions not in any historical order, but more in actually a geographical move across, so that we're able to do some things interdisciplinary with history and religion, which may not fit everyone's context, but it seems to really work for us. So I start with kind of, that first unit, which is, again, all about the construction. And I use a gimmick or a hook that I have to credit Benjamin Marcus for, and the work of the Religious Freedom Center, now the Freedom Forum way back when. And that is, the image of studying religion like a sleuth, like a detective. So like the hook of, again, and also teaching them within that, the idea of that academic approach to religion, and differentiating the devotional from the academic. And right at the beginning, I introduce Sikhi, because it's always the start of the year. It's always a 9/11 anniversary. And so we always start by looking at the story of Balbir Singh Sodhi and his murder in Mesa, Arizona, right after 9/11, 2001. And so first of all, they have never heard of Sikhi. I make it, of course, age appropriate in terms of, how we speak about it. But I start right away by saying, this is why it matters, basically. This is why it's important that you understand and know more about religion in the world. And you may not be religious, but it's an incredibly important aspect of human history, which I'm speaking to the choir here. Mm-hmm. But after the intro unit, I move into, so I'm starting in the Far East. And so we look at Confucianism and Taoism, right? And that's actually been pretty new just in the last few years. And students love learning about.
Yes, they do.
Confucianism and Taoism, and of course, there's so many great pop culture tie-ins with Taoism. And then we do kind of then take Shinto and kind of Buddhism together within Japan. Again, they love Shinto. There's something about those traditions that they just kind of have kind of a natural affinity for, in a way. And so then after Buddhism, then sort of move into Judaism, which, again, there's no really good transition other than we're just kind of moving, do classes on Judaism. Now, the Christianity one is interesting for us because that is the religion that the majority of students are. It's the religion that they've been, steeped in the lower school. And so I honestly don't teach a standalone unit on Christianity. For me, as I say, I pepper it throughout the year around the big times. So for example, near Christmas, we'll do an Advent Christmas lesson and the life of Jesus and what did Jesus look like. And then around Lent and Advent, we'll do another series of Christianity lessons. So I'm not sure if it's quote unquote equal time, but it's, in my mind, it's the one, again, they're most familiar with. And I really want to expand their vocabulary of the vast variety of field within religion. After Judaism, then we talk about Islam. We're actually in our Islam unit right now. We just had our field trip on Tuesday. So we went, as a little aside to my progression, I'm able to take the whole 6th grade on a field trip for the whole day. And we visit 3 local houses of worship. And this year, we actually really focused on the Abrahamic traditions, as they're called, because of the events in Gaza. and the attacks on October 7th. And so we really just focused on Islam, Christianity, and Judaism this year, but it was really an awesome day. And I know there's a whole lot on field trips and pitfalls.
Of course.
The glass is half full in my book, and there's so much potential in field trips that I think, and I have been able to accomplish them in a way that avoids pitfalls. And then that's always such rich material to bring back into the classroom. So then we'll move into Hinduism, and then we'll do a concerted unit on Sikhi, which will remind them of sort of the start of the year. Also, during that time when we're doing Islam, Hinduism, and Sikhi and religion, they are reading The Night Diary in history class, which is a novel set at the time of the partition in India, which touches a lot on religion. And so again, that's helping them to make sense of the novel and enrich the novel. And then I think we're about done. Then the end of the year is kind of the putting it all together. And then I allow them to explore a religious tradition that we either haven't been able to explore, or to explore, for example, within Christianity, maybe they want to look at Greek Orthodox Christianity as a distinctive branch, right? So they can return to one of the religions we've done, but it has to be touching on that difference within traditions. So that's the scope, if you will.
I love it. You know, I did field trips as well. Tons of guest speakers, tons of field trips. My field trips were usually optional, just based on the way that I had time to play with. So I would usually make things on like a Saturday or something like that. And then I would say, show up if you want. Don't show up if you don't want. If you show up, I'm gonna give you these like extra credit bonus points. If you come and one of your parents wants to come, bring them along. So it was a slightly different approach where it wasn't required, but the attendance was always so good. And I don't know, what do you see as like like some of those pitfalls, right? Some of those risks, like, because I got really lucky in a lot of my teaching where nothing really ever went seriously wrong. I did have some guest speaker appearances that went sideways that I had to shut down in the middle of stuff and stuff like that. But like, how do you like assess like the risk of all this?
Great question. Of course, it takes time. You have to establish relationships with people in the local community whom you trust. So, it takes a lot of homework on my part to vet the places we're going and the people who are going to be interacting with us. It takes a lot of pre-work. For example, we send a letter in our dispatch to parents to describe why of the field trip, and that this field trip, these visits are not worship directed, right? That they are about, I like to say, we're having class out in the community, to sort of avoid parents who avoid the trouble with parents who might, we don't want to catch them off guard. We don't want to act like it's something we're keeping secret. And so the more that I've been able to communicate with parents, honestly, I think the hardest thing is dress code. So we do have a dress code in our school, and we have a chapel dress code for chapel days. And we do the field trip on chapel day because that way the students are in more formal dress when we visit houses of worship, which is appropriate. We do, although the mosque that we visit does not require headscarves, I, as their teacher, quite honestly feel it's important for us to wear them out of respect. And so all the girls, bring headscarves. I share with them that we are doing that out of respect and have conversations. If they're not comfortable, they're not required. I need to allow that openness, but also to understand why it's important that we do that. There are also years when I take them to a Gurdwara, and I like that parallel too, because then the boys are covering their heads too, right, at the Gurdwara. So they have that experience. It gets a little harder now to have those conversations, though, with, thankfully our openness to gender and opening up that vocabulary there. It's a little bit harder to talk about in religion, these separations by gender, and with students who want to have that conversation. But it's challenging to be quite
Yeah.
honest. And the only other thing I'll say is I had one weird encounter. We were at a Hindu temple once, and one of our wonderful leaders, they were doing a puja to Durga, and it was wonderful. And they had rose petals and all this amazing stuff. And they asked me to come give rose petals to Durga. And I was like, and I said, sure. Like, what am I going to do? I stood up in front of all my students and I went to, offer rose petals to Durga. And I was just so hopeful that they didn't. So say, please don't ask students to do this, right? That was my fear, because I did it because it was okay with my theology and framework to do that. But I'm thankful that they didn't. But those are just the moments where you're like, oh, please don't.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, they do it out of their total generosity and hospitality, right? But the impact that can have ripple effects. So.
Yeah, that's when you wind up in the newspaper, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
on the news. Like we've seen it. Like you live in
Yep.
the DC area, like there's been a really famous story of a teacher in DC who got in trouble because of like the shahada,
Yep.
and things like that. So I'm glad that wasn't you.
Not me.
So whenever we got in touch to make this episode, I was super curious about like an assessment or an assignment in particular that really stands out to you, about something that you're super proud of, something that you're happy with the design of. And so I'm curious about what your favorite assignment or assessment is. Just tell me a little bit about that, because then I wanted to get into like how you like measure performance and things like that.
Yeah. And I've done a lot of thinking on that over the years. I think in terms of assessments, I really do embrace creativity. I think that even sixth graders have a lot on their plates academically at this point. And I want religion to be a class that they take seriously, but I also want it to be open in a way that perhaps other classes are not. Open to choice, open to, individual interests and so forth. And so, some of my favorite assessments are things like, instead of giving a traditional test or quiz where they're just memorizing facts, for example, would be, say, a one-pager project where they're able to show what they know on one page through drawings and through writing, of course. But they're able, to identify, for example, those 3 Bs, right, that I use: belief, behavior, and belonging, and start to use, the concepts, the 3 premises that we talk about in, the academic study of religion, that they can put those tools to work. And whether you're a fabulous artist or not, it usually is a method that a lot of people can find success with. So that's one I love, and I use it early on in the year, and then that's what they'll do their final project on, with a little more meat added, a little more writing component to it, so that they can explore. And at that point, again, they're like able to explore Wicca or voodoo, or, some people do Navajo religion. That's where they can really dig into things that I am not able to spend as much time on as I would like. I also do this cool thing with a lotus flower, where I use a lotus flower with layers, and they make a lotus flower, but each layer has a task and a learning activity that goes with it. And again, I like things that are tangible. I'm very much a sensory person. So whether it's food or letting them be a little crafty, because I don't see them as often as their other teachers do, I also really want to make impactful memories. So for me, tapping into their senses, whether through food, or through music, through dance even, I like to incorporate those things in my class and in my assessments.
I love it. Do you have any examples of things that have kind of surprised you in your own teaching? Like, what's things that students have like gone beyond what you've expected of them, and just that kind of stand out? Because like some of my students in the past have done like these immensely detailed paintings and like little
Yeah.
sculptures, and I'm just wondering like what you've seen that's like really surprised you.
Yeah, I think what I do recognize is there's such a vast variety in sixth grade. I mean, there is some work that you can tell is sixth grade, and then there are those students that are already having, abstract thinking, and yeah, the quality of their work just goes above and beyond. And those are also students whose parents, quite honestly, are probably letting them listen to the news, right? And they've just got more of a worldview that is already larger and more expansive than other students. So yeah, I'm often blown away sometimes by their quality of work, and their ability um, to articulate and understand. And I don't have one specific sort of student that stands out, other than it's that sort of category of student that is rare, that is just kind of leagues above um, of the other students.
What are some of your goals that you're still striving for this far into your
Yeah,
career with regards to your own pedagogy about studying religion?
yeah. So, I've had to do a lot of the work on my own, to be honest. I mean, about teaching about religion, I certainly, that wasn't a part of any education course at UVA. Um, Teaching about religion. Also, when I was in seminary, there was only one requirement to take something beyond sort of the Christian tradition. So everything I've learned has come from sort of self discovery, and also a lot of professional development and a lot of reading. And again, I've been so over these, over 2 decades of teaching, there has been such an incredible growth in scholarly work on this, particular field of religion and education. I think what I always have to then do is take a lot of that and translate it for middle schoolers, right? So whether it's taking a college level textbook, both for myself to learn again and relearn, but then to somehow translate that in language and in ways that, a middle schooler can understand. So I'm always perfect. I mean, there's no perfection, right?
Right.
Progress. I'm always trying to improve, right? I think that's what makes us good teachers, right? I mean, rarely am I teaching the same thing year to year. And what I've had to do a lot, we don't use standards in independent schools, but we've changed the way we do report cards in making them more skills based. So then the question is, oh my gosh, how do I articulate what skills really I'm trying to accomplish in this construction process, right? Um, and so, not sort of having a lot to work with, I have to sort of generate those skills that are unique to religion. I do draw a lot on, say, the history and English departments, as far as what religion, where religion falls in the curriculum. Um, but yeah, I'm still working on the vocabulary I use to describe to people what I do, and then what I hope students will be able to do. Um, so I can, basic things like, understanding and applying content knowledge. Although I will say, being in teaching so long, the content knowledge, in some ways, my desire for students to memorize or to know that has lessened, and the importance of relationship has increased, right? And that's really happened too, that students are not going to remember, or not going to um, really work or be curious and be open if they don't trust the teacher. And so I didn't realize that early on. I didn't realize how important that relationship was. And particularly in middle school, it's so important. So of course I want them to have a mastery of content, but as I said, they're not going to remember a whole lot about sixth grade religion class. But I'm hoping I'm planting those seeds and those memories again that can be rewatered down the line. Talk a lot about dialogue skills, right? Like engaging in respectful dialogue, identifying multiple perspectives with sympathetic understanding, right? That's stepping into another person's shoes, communicating their ideas effectively in writing, using listening and questioning to further comprehension. communicating ideas effectively in speaking, right? Doing projects where they have to present and be the teacher. And then two additional ones that I don't evaluate them on these two things in a formal way, but these are my hopes for them would be, maintaining an open mind, right, about the beliefs and practices of others and sort of modeling that openness, and then connecting class topics to life outside the classroom. So I always tell them, this knowledge is, you're playing on a sports team and you see a boy who's wearing a turban. I want you to know, why he's wearing a turban and to understand, you have someone on your soccer team who's, fasting for Ramadan. Gosh, you could be a great ally and friend to them because you're going to understand and know. So those are things I can't measure, but those sure are my hopes for them taking this knowledge further.
Do you have any explicit advice that you would give for teachers out there who are interested in forming their own religions class at their own school?
Yeah. I think, I'm sure it's different in every school is different. I think really understanding the language of the devotional aspect of religion and the academic study of religion. I mean, adults don't get that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, making your case for why the course matters, the way in which you're going to teach the course. I think my advice is always to focus on quality, not quantity, because we could spend lifetimes studying one religious tradition and we could never master it.
You'd never be done.
So, never be done. So I don't even try. It's like, I don't cover a lot of history in my class because it's not what's most relevant for them right now. So figuring out, no matter what age you're teaching, kind of what would be most relevant for them. And keep it messy. I think sometimes we think things have to be so, teachers, we like order. We control our own classrooms usually, right? So to let it be more spontaneous and messy sometimes is okay. It can feel uncomfortable for us, but it's also a place of real creativity and possibility, both for us as teachers, but also for our students. So I don't know if that quite answered it exactly, but that's just some of the advice that I would give. And sorry, I have my classroom door is opening at the moment.
You're
if you
fine.
hear that background noise.
It's great. I love it. Well, Rebecca Cooper, first of all, thank you so much for being so patient with regards to coming on the podcast. I'm delighted that my interview invitation from 2018 was reaccepted in 2024. I love hearing about what you do in your classroom. I love learning about why you think that teaching about religion in middle school is important. Your answer really just hit me in the heart. I loved it because I was thinking about myself and how much I could have benefited from learning about something explicitly at that age as well. It means a lot. So, thank you so much for coming on Classical Ideas and telling me about your job, your passion, your career, what you love about your students. Like, I love teachers that clearly love the people that they work with on a every given day, because as the dad of a fifth grader who is going to be a sixth grader next year, I picture my daughter having you as a teacher, and I'm just like, man, this is great. So I love this.
Thank you so much, Greg. Let me say thank you, too. Education is not an easy field. And again, I found you early on and so appreciated, that you found a way to do something that you love and that's meaningful, and that you demonstrated, continuing your learning, even when, a PhD wasn't going to be, you're doing something better than a PhD, quite honestly, and a way more meaningful. I mean, no offense to PhD people. I love you, professors who've been my teachers, but you're doing amazing work. So thank you.
Yeah, I just needed to find the thing that was for me, that fit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to learn about everything. I wanted to not focus. I wanted to follow where my passions and my little tangents led me. And this has been the absolute perfect medium for those explorations for me. And now I'm really glad that you're going to be a part of that little weaving journey that I've forged for myself here on this podcast.
Nice.
Rebecca Cooper, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Take care.